Presenting Benny Goodman and his
There
music.
we go. Morning, everybody. Tea. Hey, Chris. Hey, baby Julius. Hey, Karen and Susan. Hey, Lorena, Martin, and Lisa. Hey, Diane, Heather, Luann.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen. The
Hey,
man with the
Octavio.
torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms.
Hey,
called
Vicky.
dancehall
Hey, Georgia.
In the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago.
Hey,
And
Jim,
first of
Amy.
all,
Hey,
one of
Tato.
Irving Berlin's greatest hits,
Hey, Madison
Blue Sky.
St. You're the namesake of the street, I believe. Hey, Diane. Hey, everybody. Hey, Jolene. Larry and Denise. Hey, Jim, Diane, Bridget. Hey, everybody. Hey, Mary Jo. Hey, Alex. Hey, Carol, Kathleen. Betty peeking in. Hey, Joanne. Morning, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, those beyond the binary, children of all ages. Hey, Jordana. Hey, no one on YouTube. Hey, Darren. Chattanooga, all right. No, Madison, I feel okay. I don't have any more of a cold than I ever did, but the audio okay? It's my usual chronic sinus infection, really. Hey, Teresa, hey, Gail. Morning, Janet in Florida. Hi, Bruce. Hey, Kimberly. Hey, Dark Stalker over on YouTube. Hey, Ann. Morning, Casey. Do I sound kind of nasally today? I don't know, maybe it's an audio thing. I'm just using the regular microphone. The hair is not fully dry, I guess. Hey, Carol. My nose does feel a little bit stuffed, but not that much more than normal. Hey, Lori. Hey, Ann. Hey, Sue. It's a weird thing with the microphone, maybe. It's all about its usual settings. Hey, Elizabeth. All right, in most quarters I seem to sound okay, so hey, Kathy. Just the old chronic sinus infection that I've had since 1995. Hey, Laura in Lake Point Tower, not the home of Oprah. Hey, Cindy. All right, no fighting out there in the comments. Octavio knows about the chronic sinus infection, I'm sure. Hey, Kathy. Morning, Mary Rose. Hey, Cindy. I think I need to repost next week's Graceland tour on Facebook. I think it should have been copied, but it's not getting any traction at all, so. Hey, Lisa. Good morning, everybody. My allergies have it a little bit worse today. Yesterday didn't start out too bad, it just got bad over the course of the day, and I don't know how that works. Frozen lasagna actually sounds good right now, Sue. Hey, Michelle. Good morning, everybody. All the while I'll ever care for with all my heart. Bob, next Rose Hill tour I think is in a couple weeks. I'll maybe do that one third weekend of September. Second weekend I got stuff all day. Yeah, Plinters Row, I got the thing over at Centuries and Sloughs in Forest Park. I got a lot of things I need to post. I need to post more of the October stuff. I need to post a couple of private things. Lots to do. So much to do, so little time. Patreon post for tomorrow is ready to go. There will be a tour with a surprise guest if you show up early during Mystericon. Morning, Melanie in Toronto. Hey, Christy and Grandma Belle. Tomorrow morning, check me out on WGN TV. Gail, in-person tours end sometime in November, usually. Do I do any tours on Halloween? I'll be doing lots of tours around Halloween. I'll be doing the Haunted History tours for the Lincoln Park Zoo all through October. Cemetery tours all through October, lots of those. Hey, Gail. What time am I scheduled for WGN? Let me see. Per my notes, I'm supposed to log on at 9:15. It should be sometime shortly after that. So maybe a slight delay for Mural Monday. Or it'll have to be something close to my house. That's easy enough. I'm gonna have to go do that awesome Jenny Goss one on Devon again. Morning, Roberta in the sacred Black Hills. Sue, tomorrow at 9:15 a.m. is what they got me scheduled for. It'll probably be a little after that. Where are the cats? Good question. Priya was just all over these shelves. Oh yeah, Priya is on... They are each on respective couches. You can see Priya on that one. Miles you probably can't see, but he's on the other couch. There's Miles and Priya.
And they all loved it.
Hey, Uncle Dave.
When they played by Benny Goodman.
Hey, Sue. Hey, Jen.
Just in the same vein. Rosetta.
I will let Benny Goodman do one more tune, then we'll get started properly. I see this is one of the tours where I went with Central Delta Time instead of Central Standard Time. That's a choice. Hey, Miguel. We'll let Benny do this tune. I'll do the tour, start giving Ronnie rides all over town. Hey, Paula. Hey, Amanda and Susan. Yes, time is a construct. Time is not real. It is all a social construct. So, well, also, in particular, we're not too far on Madison Street from where they decided to divide us all into time zones to begin with. So right now, technically, it's not quite 10 o'clock. If it's 10 o'clock in Chicago now, that means it's like 10:15 in Indianapolis and 11:30 in Des Moines, you know. Until the General Time Convention in the 1880s. Hey, Lauren. Hey, Rich. We'll give this just a second to get started. We'll let Benny finish up this tune and we'll get going. Hey, Sarah. Oh yeah, there are definitely articles from the 1880s like, so now the railroad companies think they're more powerful than the sun? But having everybody go by solar noon doesn't work in a society where people interact with people in other cities regularly. Or broadcasts come from cities other than your own. Or you travel between cities other than your own. And have to keep appointments. Hey, Sherlock. Early, I do enjoy some big band music. I'm more of a Duke guy than a Benny guy, but I got this great Benny intro.
Benny Goodman is being presented
From the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago, that's Benny Goodman coming to you live. All right, everybody, welcome along. It's time we get started properly. All right, I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, the now rare Ghosts of Chicago. Apparently, you can't even get that as an ebook on Amazon right now, but I've got the rights back to it. I could, given the time and inclination, put it back up. H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Murder Maps USA, from Thames and Hudson, just recently released, and the brand new Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets. That was still coming soon last time I did this tour, but now it is officially out. You can get it through the publisher, University of Illinois Press. A lot of local bookstores have it, I understand. Amazon, I guess, is sold out, but they should be getting replenished supply pretty soon. So, all right, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about Madison Street. This is the street that is zero on the grid. If you're on Madison Street, you're not in 1 north, you're not in 1 south, you're right on zero. The way they've made things up goes right through the heart of the loop and right on into the west side and all the way out into the west suburbs. Today we're just going to be doing a place that's just a section from the loop to the west side that's just a little too long to walk on a walking tour. But it's one of those stretches of road where you find story after story after story to talk about. We'll have to do it virtually because it's too long of a hike. We're going to start right at the end here. Right at the old Wabash Street Railroad Station on Madison, which has been rebuilt recently, so the picture only does it so much justice. But right back here, back in the early 1920s, there was a woman by the name of Jeanette Hoy who had fallen in love with a friend of hers. They both lived at the Eleanor Club, which was a place where single women could get apartments in a safe area, which was a little bit more difficult in those days. But at the Eleanor Club, they became really good friends, but Jeanette wanted to be more than friends. Wrote her various letters to this effect, and her friend said, no, you know what, as a matter of fact, leave me alone. So right out here in the train station, Jeanette one day waited for her friend to get off the train at her usual stop, and as she did, she shot her. Then shot herself a few times, then walked into the nearest cigar shop to say, "Excuse me, I've just shot myself." So this was quite a story at the time. It's interesting that they were not shy at all about the fact that this odd friendship. Now Jeanette herself eventually apologized. The whole matter just kind of was dropped because neither of them were killed. They were both just sort of wounded. In 1924, she went through the exact same sort of thing. Came after somebody with a gun when she refused to return her affections. And this is where the story takes a more of a dark turn. Jeanette was sent to an asylum around 1924. And that's really about the last that I know of her. Unfortunately, in those days, they just didn't understand those kind of things. You can't really defend somebody who goes after others with a gun, no matter what the societal pressures were at the time. We'll zip away from there a little bit. Take a quick turn. You can see I filmed this a couple of years ago. Past the goth target. And down on the end there, you can see this building with the weird square of light blue windows over on the left-hand side. Now, this weird square of light blue windows represents the space where Mcvicker's Theater used to stand. Several generations of Mcvicker's Theater. This one shown here. We'll mark it off at about the exact space where it would have stood. This is the version that was standing in the 1890s, but there were a lot of Mcvicker's theaters over the years. Mr. Mcvicker started working with John Rice, a theater owner who later became the mayor of Chicago for a while. And at Mcvicker's Theater here, he hosted just about all of the major actors and actresses of the day, perhaps most notably Edwin Booth. John Wilkes Booth played there for quite a while as well back in 1863. 1862, 63. He played most of the major Shakespeare roles while he was there. Stayed over at the Tremont House Hotel. You can see him here playing Macbeth, plotting to kill a king. Just about every part that he played, he was plotting to kill a royalty of some sort. But his brother Edwin, generally regarded as the more talented of the two, ended up marrying Mary Mcvicker, pictured here, the daughter of the family. He had persuaded her to go back on stage acting as Juliet to his Romeo. She had been a child actress in the theater until she outgrew that. By all accounts, she was not great. The review of her in the Tribune sometimes read at her grave. I almost feel bad doing it. It's like when her voice becomes manageable and matures in tone, when she learns the power there is in magnetic facial expression, when she, through patient study, clothes herself in the attributes of her character, she may take a leading role on the stage, although not in such roles as Juliet. But she did have a fairly successful career acting alongside her husband until her premature death, though it is generally also said I have met people who told me that she was absolutely awful to him. I talked about him losing a tooth that someone gave him, a tooth of a former actor, and some people who were on the tour that day said, oh, I bet his awful wife lost it. Me and my husband roleplay as them. I did not ask for further details, though I dearly wish that I had now. And also, we've got a weird little connection here at Mcvicker's Theater to H.H. Holmes, the Devil in the White City guy. One of H.H. Holmes's victims, of whom there is no confirmed photograph, was a woman by the name of Emmeline St. We know that she liked having her picture taken. We know that there were several photographs of her, but in 1895 they weren't quite publishing photographs in newspapers yet. They were publishing drawings of photographs. She moved into Holmes's building in 1892, disappeared December of that same year. Holmes was fairly consistent in saying that she died during an abortion. But she met with friends around the city. She was always telling her friends that she was engaged to somebody, though the name of the guy differed every time she told the story. Frankly, I think that she was just a woman with a secret. She was having an affair with Holmes, but knew that Holmes had a wife, thought the wife would be out of the way pretty soon, and until then was just trying to be kind of discreet. As discreet as she could be. But while I was working on one of the Holmes TV shows, one of their angles was they were going through this box somebody had that included a Holmes document and then a whole bunch of pictures. Matching the pictures to anybody specific in the Holmes saga proved to be a little bit difficult. There weren't really names on the back. There was one guy who had a name that matched Holmes' character, but it wasn't the same guy. It was another guy of the same name. But one of the pictures was taken at Mcvicker's, at the Stevens photography studio, which was in the Mcvicker's building. And we can't actually trace Emmeline St. to the Mcvicker's building. She visited a friend who was there. That was reported in the papers. So it's entirely possible she would have stopped into the portrait studio while she was around. This looks like more or less of a match to me. But it's hard to tell because you could take practically any picture of a young white woman that age, and it probably would have been about the same situation. That could be a picture of Emmeline Legrand. That's about as close as we're going to get. We can almost, I wouldn't say we can confirm it, but all of the pieces fit. Right time period, right building, right look. The unsolved mystery, but it's about as close as we're likely to get of a photograph of her, unless something was written on the back for it. But we'll move down just a little bit further and jump ahead about 30 years in the future to the 1920s, long before the Chase Tower stood here. And we're right about here at Madison and Dearborn, right in the heart of the Loop, one of the busiest intersections anywhere in 1928, the mob pulled off possibly their most public hit when they killed a guy by the name of Lombardo. Now, Lombardo had just become the head of the Unione Siciliana. This was officially a civic organization, but by the late 1920s, it was pretty blatantly a front for the mafia. And whoever was in charge of the Unione Siciliana was pretty much in charge of the mob. Trouble is, this made the heads of the Union really an easy target for people. Like, all through the 1920s, all through the late 1920s, one after another, a guy would take control of the Union and then promptly be shot to death. Lombardo was considered a big Capone ally. Capone himself desperately wanted to be the president of the Unione Siciliana, but he wasn't Sicilian, so they wouldn't let him. So instead, he just managed to install one of his allies, Mr. Lombardo. But then Lombardo was shot dead right in the Loop, right in front of this building. There's actually a picture. You can see his body lying there on the ground. You can see all the guys in their identical straw hats coming around. Now, this was all right at rush hour, too, which was really kind of a shock. The thing is, they had been loading an airplane that was going to be used as a decoration into the building. So everybody out there on the street was looking up, looking at the airplane being brought into the building. Didn't look down to see a guy being shot. The guy was shot and then ran off. This was thought at the time to be something probably set up by Joe Aiello, one of Capone's various rivals. Then it was said that the St. Valentine's Day Massacre a few months later was probably revenge for this sort of thing. At the time, there was a lot of loyalty switching going around. Trying to keep track of who was who and who was shooting who at the time is really very difficult. Even at the time, they didn't know. But a few years later, they listed the bullets that killed him as some of the bullets that were available in the forensics lab. They had gotten pretty good at saving this kind of evidence. I don't know whatever happened to all of these. But up at Northwestern, they had a crime lab where they had the bullets that killed him, the bullet that killed Big Tim Murphy. You can still see some bullet holes in the wall of the house where he was shot. William McSwiggan, that was a big deal. Irving Schlig. I was just looking up Irving Schlig. Irving Schlig is going to appear briefly in tomorrow's Patreon post. Not one of our better-known gangster killings, but he was one who was connected to a woman named Mary Margaret Collins, who was said to be like the Fatal Mary, the gangster kiss of death. She was connected, romantically or otherwise, to at least 6 or 7 guys who ended up being shot. She was very famous at the time. She was called the it girl of the underworld, but she's just totally fallen out of the news in recent years. Her story just doesn't get retold much. Very popular in the early 1930s, though. I'll retell her a bit, at least on the Patreon, over the course of the next week. But from here, we're going to move a little bit further down the alley, down Madison. Proceeding west. Hey, David, glad you made it. Now, just a little further down here, if we went around the corner, we're not really covering too much about this particular stretch of road, more the alley back behind it to the right. This was where all the newspaper offices were back in the 1890s or so, like such as, they called one of the offices the Madhouse on Madison Street. And this is a book I haven't actually read. I need to get my hands on that one. But back around it, you can see some of them here. You can see the Record. That was the Chicago Daily News morning edition. Also, the Chicago American was up around here. The regular Daily News office was around here. The Herald office was around here. Really pretty much all of them. And then in the back was Newsboys Alley. Now, there aren't really pictures of Newsboys Alley itself. This is a recreation. There was a guy named J. Ellsworth Gross who used to take photographs of Newsboys. After he suffered from health problems and couldn't get out there, he just painted a complete recreation of it as a photo set. And so this would have been a studio shot recreating the boys having a chicken fight back in the back of Newsboys Alley, which was the kind of thing they did to amuse themselves between new editions coming out. The Newsboys, just in general, were a really interesting bunch. They were about as diverse a group as you'd ever find back then, spoke in kind of their own language, a mixture of thieves' slang, their own slang, and different words from all of the different nationalities from which these boys came, all of their native languages. That's not to say that they were exactly what we would now call woke. They all had nicknames, and most of the nicknames were horribly offensive. I mean, these were kids living largely unsupervised. Many of them were homeless. They were a society all by themselves. Being polite was not really one of their things, but in a lot of ways they worked together, gambled off of each other constantly. Now, it is even said, and this is a little bit shaky, but it was often said that the Newsboys kind of became a farm team for the mobsters. Now, the newspapers used to hire what was called sluggers. The Examiner, the Tribune, and the Journal are all said to have hired different newsboys to go around the newsstands and knock it over if they weren't selling the right kind of papers. This circulation war got to be pretty deadly. Dean O'Banion, the head of the North Side Mob and one of Mary Margaret Collins' boyfriends who got shot, supposedly, was said to have been a newspaper slugger when he was just a kid. He was killed in 1924. I've got documents saying that he was involved in this going back to about 1930 or so. Most of what we know about it really comes from the Daybook, which was really a B-list Chicago paper, a miniature one, that talked about it a lot, partly because they weren't involved. They couldn't afford to hire newspaper sluggers of their own. Now, naturally, the Tribune, the Examiner, and the Journal did not talk about this in the press. It wasn't good for business to go around talking about the fact that you were hiring newspaper sluggers. But the Daybook wasn't, so they felt like they could talk about as much as they want here. Here's Newspaper Sluggers Riot. No witnesses. Of course, no witnesses. One person that they mentioned quite a bit was Spike O'Donnell. This is way back in 1916, well before Prohibition. Spike O'Donnell eventually would in fact become a gangster on his own. One of the O'Donnell gang was one of the bigger gangs in the city outside of the Capone and the Moran gang. So there is at least some documentation that we can find that people who started out as newspaper sluggers went on to become proper gangsters later on. Now, one of the people who hired these guys was a guy by the name of Moses Annenberg, who later went on to buy the Philadelphia Inquirer. Now, according to Colonel McCormick, who ran the Tribune at the time, about 27 people were killed in these circulation wars over the course of the 1920s. Annenberg would have been kind of the boss of the whole thing. Later, he was sentenced for tax fraud by the very same judge who had sentenced Al Capone for tax evasion. And of course, beyond just the newspaper guys who were hanging out in the alley here, there were two doors in this alley. One led to a room full of benches where newsboys were allowed to sleep, since quite a few of them were homeless, and the other led to the Whitechapel Club. Now, inside of the alley was this press club in the 1890s, 1889 to 1897, run primarily by newspaper men who worked on crime beats and had to have kind of a sick sense of humor. They had skulls that they drank out of, and most of what they did in this place was drink, but it was all decorated kind of like an Addams Family plays. There were actual murder weapons up on the wall. There were bits of nooses that had been used to hang people on the wall. Here they would sing, listen to lectures about knives. They had a belly dancer in one time, and they drank out of skulls pretty regularly. They also used skulls for lighting. They had hollowed some out with like colored glass over the eye sockets that were rigged up as lamps to put an eerie glow all over the place. We go there pretty regularly on the time travel pub crawls. Now, something you'll notice that's unusual about these guys, this being the 1890s, most of them have no mustaches. This was something in the 1930s when people were reminiscing. That was why they would think, wow, we really were ahead of our time back then. But in the 1930s, mustaches were kind of falling out. When young people saw an old guy who still had his Victorian facial hair, they would shout, "Beaver!" which gave you a good excuse to shout beaver in the middle of the street, I suppose. The Whitechapel Club guys were a little bit ahead of their time. There's only a couple of mustachioed gentlemen in this whole clip. And we're going to move out of the Whitechapel Club here. I love talking about the Whitechapel Club. We recreated their punch pretty well for the time travel pub crawls. We'll go just a little bit further down to a little bit of a more nondescript space. And Darkstalker, no, Holmes would not have sold them the skulls. It's the right time period, but the whole story about Holmes selling people skeletons is really shaky. Even as Holmes stuff goes. But down over here, as we get a little bit further west, All right, Madison and Wells. There was a case here back in 1857. 1857, Alan Pinkerton was called in because there was a near riot. A guy from Pennsylvania named Samuel Ganz was stopping at a hotel here, along with a man named Thompson. He was there with a kid named Samuel Ganz, a 16-year-old, a young black teenager who had lived with him as an apprentice ever since he was 2. And Ganz was free, this was Pennsylvania, but rumor went around that this guy passing through here with the black teenager was taking him into slavery. So they brought Alan Pinkerton in to investigate. He had come to Chicago specifically to work on the Underground Railroad. He was satisfied after interviewing them that Ganz was a free young man. He was just an apprentice to Mr. Thompson and was free to go if he wanted to. However, the fact that Alan Pinkerton showed up at all only convinced people that this was, in fact, a kid being taken into slavery. So when he left with them, a crowd attacked. They ended up taking a carriage about 3 blocks further west of here, at which point they were overtaken. Everything was busted up. They had to rush Samuel and Mr. Thompson into jail just to kind of hold them for a while. Eventually, Pinkerton and Ganz were both charged with inciting a riot. The whole thing was swept away, and eventually he was free to go, managed to get out. Ganz came out and gave a speech to the people. The Tribune had an interesting response the next day. They said, "We cannot blame the colored men of this city for the jealousy with which they watch anything that looks like an attempt to take one of their color back to slavery, that bitter, cursing, terrible slavery which so many of them have suffered." Now, the Tribune was much more the anti-slavery paper compared to some of the others at the time. It's not even more of the middle-of-the-road papers would not have looked at this near riot and said, well, we can't really blame them, can we? As was the case here. What picture is this? Oh yeah, this is like further down in the story. I just kind of noticed this thing. I suppose it was supposed to say forced to shift for herself. But that amused the hell out of me. All right. We'll just proceed a little bit further over to the edge of the river. On Wacker Drive, where stands the Civic Opera Building. The magnificent 1929 Graham Anderson Probston White Civic Opera House. Subject of any number of urban legends about being haunted, and any number of urban legends about why it's shaped like a throne, the real reason is kind of mundane. The 2 towers on the side were just going to be office towers who helped keep the place afloat financially. Good idea, but doesn't really work when you open a building in November of 1929 when the Depression is just getting started. Also, tends to be left out of the ghost stories is how many people died just in the construction. There were 3 people who died in the construction that I know about. This is an article tracing the fall of one of them. Then a rich manufacturer died inside of the place right after they opened, died by suicide. Not to mention there was a daredevil who was killed in a fall in the place. There was this daredevil by the name of Rudy Cimino. He went by a few other names at different times. But this is a film of him doing a stunt. This isn't him on the Civic Opera Building. This is somewhere further north in Chicago. Stacking chairs on top of a building. And he's okay. He's okay. He only went down about 5 feet there. This really activates my own fear of heights that I never thought I had until fairly recently. But this is what Rudy would do. He liked to climb up to the top of buildings like a human fly, and then he would do stunts up on the top. Here he's stacking up chairs on the edge. They really should have tilted the camera a bit so that we knew where these were being placed. There we go. You can see it's right on the edge there. So if he had fallen in the wrong direction, he would have been falling all over the place. But he was killed in a fall. He tried to do this stunt on the Civic Opera Building right about the time that it opened. And not only did he fall to his death, but he landed on someone and killed them in the process, too. So if one wanted to say that this building was cursed, you got plenty of grounds for it. There were several deaths in there before it was even opened, and then it opened right around the time the stock market crash hit that kicked off the Great Depression. There's a zip right across the river from it is Holabird and Ruth's Chicago Daily News building. Another great 1920s building. And over along the edge of it, this is a really cool plaza with a lot of Egyptian-style hieroglyphs showing off tributes to other great printers like Mr. Pulitzer himself. Or Mr. Medill, which is an interesting pick. Medill ran the Chicago Tribune, the great rival of the Chicago Daily News. But by the time that they built their building, he was long since dead, I suppose. So it wasn't too bad to put a tribute up to him and at least acknowledge his accomplishments as a printer, especially in Chicago. Next to that is Benjamin Franklin. One guy who is conspicuously absent from the notable printers at the time is Wilbur F. Story of the Chicago Times. You all know what I think of Wilbur F. Story. Ran the anti-Lincoln paper in Chicago. This is really a fantastic building, and sometimes we've gotten a little more in depth on this one. I thought I had more video for this one, in fact, but we'll do it another time. We'll proceed a little bit further. Now we're on the other side of the river, getting into the west side. Off in the distance, you can see the bat statue by Klaus Oldenburg, who just died a few weeks ago. But once upon a time, right on this place, there stood a hotel called the Galt House, which figured into the story of a guy who, the main branch of the story takes place a few blocks away, but there was a guy by the name of George Painter back in 1891. He was living on the west side with a woman named Alice Martin, who was not his wife, which shocked people a little bit that this couple cohabitating despite not being married. He didn't work. He spent most of his time drinking her money away. He was, by all means, known as a brutal human being. She was also apparently having an affair with a guy by the name of Dick Edwards, who was equally brutal. But one night, neighbors heard a whole bunch of screams. Several minutes later, people heard George shouting, Are you people all dead? What's going on here? Alice has been murdered. Where is everybody?" Now, he said that he had been at Schiller's Saloon, which was over at Madison and Canal, about where we are right now. Later, he said it must have been Dick who murdered her. Dick had been seen walking into the Galt House by one witness, walking in, wiping blood from his hands, and saying that he had just trimmed a woman up on Green Street. Now, this was kind of a hard story to believe, and eventually, when it came time to decide whether or not to commute George Painter's sentence after he was found guilty, Governor Altgeld decided he just didn't really believe that Dick Edwards story, partly because Dick was the kind of person who would shoot somebody to death, not beat somebody to death. Painter seemed like a more likely suspect here. So he was hanged in Chicago after a couple of years after all of this. On the speech, he gave on the scaffold, he gave a whole speech saying, "If I killed Alice Martin, the girl I dearly loved, the woman I loved so much, I would almost commit any crime for her. I pray this minute, my last minute on earth, that the eternal God will put me into eternal hell. Look here, gentlemen, if there is one man among you who is an American, I say to him on his soul, I say, see that the murderer of Alice Martin is found." This is fairly typical gallows stuff. More often they would come up and apologize and talk about how nice the warden was. But George Martin was hanged, and actually had to be hanged twice, because the rope broke and he landed on his head. So they hauled him back up, kind of hanged him again and slid him down the track door, because the sentence said he must hang by the neck until he was dead, and by God, they were going to hang him by his neck until he was dead, even though they thought he was probably already dead from the fall. Rather a brutal thing. And then in 1914, another guy confessed to the crime. A guy by the name of Jack Cade. Actually, a couple of different drifters and prisoners confessed to the Alice Martin murder a couple of times over the years. But this was one that was held up as an example. Like when Sam Cardinello was awaiting the gallows and his lawyers were trying to get him off, his lawyers really brought this up in the hearings, that just not too long ago, back in the 1890s, we hanged a man who turned out to be innocent. We also know that Alice's brother ended up killing somebody, too. I'll move on just a little bit further. A little bit further west, we'll get over towards Halstead Street. We're getting up to a space now that once upon a time would have been known as Skid Row. Not too long ago, in fact, just about 50, 60 years ago, the area looked about like this. One person has described it as like a neighborhood consisting almost entirely of men who were alcoholics. You'd walk around and just see them peeing on the sidewalk, whatever. So the reputation for that goes back to about the early 20th century. And in fact, in 1915, there was a parade of the jobless and hungry here that was attacked by the police. Move it up a little bit. Several people ended up being arrested. People were just walking like with signs saying, "Give us this day our daily bread," and the cops busted in and attacked. Among those present was Lucy Parsons, who was the widow of one of the Haymarket anarchists, a really fascinating person herself. Was still making speeches about anarchy and socialism in Bughouse Square up through the late 1930s or so. So, this is an interesting case. A whole lot of people. This became a riot, though most people believe that there hadn't really been a riot. It was just people walking around with signs until the police showed up, at which point the police started slugging everybody, despite the fact that a lot of the crowd consisted of women. So like a Haymarket widow and 20 others were locked up. You can see different views of the sides by Jane Addams over here on the right in this article. So we'll show in a couple of quotes that came up. Scorching denunciations of the police by the Reverend Irwin St. John Tucker, who said it was an incendiary meeting. The police said it was all the violent IWW, the Wobblies, the industrial workers of the world. But he said that the real IWW was the police. They are engaged in the business of manufacturing crime so they can have the glory of stamping it out. The preacher said, when the city of Chicago authorizes wild beasts to slug hungry men in public for publicly spraying the words of the Lord's Prayer that give us this day our daily bread, the city, I say, has declared itself to be anti-Christian, atheistic, and anarchistic. This came up quite a lot. The police accused by Hull House of starting the West Side Riot. This is by Jane Addams, who went on to win a Nobel Peace Prize. First American woman to do so. She ran a Hull House, the settlement house that would have been about 8 blocks south of where we are right now. In fact, one of the people who was arrested in the course of all this was a woman by the name of Mary Wilmar. Mary Wilmar was the one who came up and bailed everybody out. She was a rich woman who lived in the Congress Hotel. She had previously lived in the house where the Congress Hotel was before the Great Chicago Fire. And then when they bought the land from her, one of her conditions was saying, "Okay, but I have to be allowed to live in the hotel." And then not too long after that, the radicals turned on Jane Addams themselves because she was considered kind of a sellout by some of them. Because she was still advocating peace, and they were starting to get tired of that kind of thing. Move a little bit further west here. A day that I was able to film on a better day for filming. And right up around here, near where the Jets Pizza is now, I believe right next door to the Jets Pizza, there's this really scary sign on the wall up here. It's a salon. Which, based on the picture inside, looks like it's a salon for vampires. But this was the site of a place called The Hub back in the old days. It was a bar popular with counterfeiters. In the old days, we had bars that catered to specific types of criminals. So this one officially catered mostly to counterfeiters, but was also popular with grave robbers. This is said to be a picture of the proprietor, a guy named Jack Mullins. That's not the name on the bottom, which makes me a little bit suspicious of it, but I'd love it if this was a real picture of Jack Mullins. This is exactly how I picture him anyway. But he was among the people who was involved in a posse to steal the body of Abraham Lincoln. It was in his place that the whole plot was hatched. A counterfeiter had gone to jail, and some of his buddies got the idea that, hey, we should do something to get him out of jail. Somebody overheard and said, I'm the boss of all grave robbers in this city. I know what you could do. We'll get a posse together, go down to Springfield and steal the bones of old man Lincoln. Then we'll hold him for ransom. We'll get your friend out of jail and get a whole ton of money to give the bones back. So they rounded up a posse. Mullins was present for the whole thing. And at the time, the coffin of Lincoln was just inside of a white marble sarcophagus. They busted into the tomb in Springfield in the dead of night, got the coffin about halfway out of the sarcophagus, but it turned out one of their posse was working for the feds. They had gotten it about to this point when he gave the signal, and the feds charged in and everybody was arrested. Mullins ended up standing trial, but the way the laws were written at the time, all they could really be charged with was the attempted theft of a $75 coffin. Now, I really need to dig a little bit more. I want to find out for sure whether this is Mr. Mullins. I love this shot. It's just too good not to be true. Move a little bit further west here. A day that I was able to film on a better day for filming. And right up around here, near where the Jets Pizza is now, I believe right next door to the Jets Pizza. This is by Jane Addams, who went on to win a Nobel Peace Prize. First American woman to do so. She ran a Hull House, the settlement house that would have been about 8 blocks south of where we are right now. We'll proceed a little further down here. Now at 1118 West Madison, which is now a nice place to go to get brunch, there used to be a thing called the Hobo College. It was founded in 1907 by a radical anarchist named Ben Reitman, also an early advocate of birth control. This became a place where hobos could come to learn hobo skills and also learn basic job skills and get a free meal, get some coffee. You can kind of see what they had set up there for them. These guys were sleeping in train yards and stuff, but here they had a pinochle deck, they had crossword puzzles, they had a checkerboard, and they could attend lectures by people like Emma Goldman, another radical anarchist who was the on-again, off-again girlfriend of Ben Reitman. They had kind of an open relationship, as I understand it. They both kind of advocated free love. But this is what this area looked like as of the 1960s. Kind of the relics of the Hobo College were still sort of hanging around. This is Scott playing Ben Reitman at one of the recreations. Scott is a regular who pops up with us now and then on the time travel pub crawls. But eventually, the anarchist who hung around there eventually started thinking he was a sellout after he got himself an automobile. These things happen. Incidentally, Emma Goldman is buried near Lucy Parsons. That was the Haymarket Anarchists Monument over at Forest Home Cemetery. And just beyond that, there's this whole radical section here of people who hung around the Hobo College, including a marker for Emma Goldman that gets a couple of the dates wrong. We got a little more time. We'll proceed a little bit further up to a children's haircut place. Well, today this is a children's haircut place and around the 1200 block of West Madison. Just take a quick look in. But back in the 1880s, late 1870s, early 1880s, where the children's haircut place is now, was the office of Dr. Thomas Neal Cream, a Chicago serial killer who predates H.H. Holmes by about a decade. Thomas Neal Cream was eventually executed in London, but got his start working here in Chicago. He had moved over from Scotland, opened a practice here as a doctor, and was first put on trial after one of his patients died on whom he was performing an abortion. This sort of tended to be his thing. He was acquitted in that case. Shortly thereafter, he was back on the job when a woman named Alice Montgomery mysteriously died. She wandered into a boarding house down the block from this, and in the middle of the night, they heard her screaming in the bathroom. Apparently, she had undergone an abortion that afternoon and had been given painkillers that were loaded with way too much strychnine. Now, the real mystery here is it's hard to imagine how nobody connected this to Dr. Thomas Neal Cream at the time. This is exactly his M.O., but the thing is they didn't know it was his M.O. yet. That was something he was better known for after he moved back to the UK. Here, he was much more of a common poisoner. Most notably, he fell in love with a woman named Mrs. Stott. They decided to poison her husband, and this is what he went to jail for in Chicago. Poisoned her husband, who now out in Garden Prairie has one of the greatest gravestones anywhere. Daniel Stott died June 1881, poisoned by his wife and Dr. Cream. It's very rare that you see a murder mystery carved into a gravestone like that, but every now and then, just every now and then. We're going to proceed a little bit further west. A little bit further west, the 1700 block, 1733, I guess I don't have a proper view of it. There was one of several bars around the city over the years that was known as the Bucket of Blood. Now, officially it was called the New Delaware, owned by a guy by the name of Jimmy Murphy, but was generally referred to as the Bucket of Blood because everybody was always getting into fights there. And eventually people would start getting killed there as well. For a while, he tried to turn it into a coffee house during the 1920s, though obviously that didn't go over too well. In 1924, a guy by the name of John Duffy, a really low-level O'Banion hitman who never actually shot anybody, was taken for the first one-way ride. He was found by the side of the road. They had arranged for him to be picked up right outside of Capone's place, though it was probably the opposite gang, the O'Banions, who did it. And he comes up quite a bit. He's on the Uptown tour in a little bit more detail. One way or the other, the guy was getting to be a nuisance to to the O'Banions and they decided to get rid of him. And one of the people who was charged with being the possible killer was Mr. Murphy, the guy who operated the Bucket of Blood. Has dealt in booze, women, and guns all his life, believed to have been in the murder crew and missing ever since. We'll also move up here. One of the other people they talked about was Al Brown. That's Al Capone, manager of the Four Deuces, the most despicable resort ever kept anywhere, located at 2222 Wabash Avenue, and always cheating between raids. It was when he was brought in for questioning about this, I think it was when he had one of his better quotes. I'm just a regular businessman, and for no reason at all, everybody's always trying to drag me into something. We'll finish off just a little bit further down at Damon. Just past Damon, across from the United Center, where this parking lot is now would have been the old Roby House. Not to be confused with the Roby House down in Hyde Park designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. This is the old Roby Tavern, which was said to be haunted by a black-robed ghost, one of the spookier-sounding ghosts. People who talked about it said that this is where some of the first hangings in Chicago took place, which is a few blocks off, but the crowd might have spilled over to around here. But it was said in the early 20th century that if you hung around the Roby Tavern at night, you would see this woman walking with her hands folded, wearing a long black robe, just wandering around through the place. Very spooky type of ghost. And now and then you tear down a building and the ghosts still get reported. I don't know of this particular one turning up in the parking lot. It'd be pretty cool if you did, though. All right, that takes us past 10:40. I think it's time for me to plug the upcoming events. So coming up on Thursday night, the virtual tour is going to be the Ghost Tour while drinking. I've said some of those stories I've told so many times that I could probably do them just on muscle memory. We're going to find out for sure on September 1st. I'm going to drink ahead of time, so I'll be doing kind of a drunk history version of the tour. We've never tried one like this. This one sounds like it might be kind of fun. September 3rd, next weekend, we've got a Graceland Cemetery in-person tour. You can find all of the details for this stuff over on adamchicago.com. And, of course, we still got some tickets left. I think there's like 2 tickets left for the 6:30 boat cruise September 30th. And quite a few more for the 8:30 one. Plenty to go around for that, but not so much that I'm going to be sinking or anything. Should you need a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, hoodie, etc., cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago has you covered. You can find links to all of these things, plus the new Coyotes and Cemeteries calendar at adamchicago.com. And with that, everybody, I will put the Benny Goodman back on, and we will just hang out like we always do. Thanks for all the help, everybody. Thanks for the donations. And here's Benny. A Bucket of Blood is now a record store. Right near a place where Johann Hawk lived. 414 Fullerton Parkway, that's, I'm not sure where that came up. It depends on whether it's before or after the street number were renumbered in 1909. Yeah, Kristen, you kind of have to murder people at the Bucket of Blood. It's kind of like, why would there even be a place called Starved Rock if there weren't murders there? But that guy on the Wilson story a while ago, who after being acquitted of murdering the Wilsons up in Winnetka, was later shot to death in Church's Ferry, North Dakota at a tavern. Now, Church's Ferry, North Dakota sounds like a town that only exists so people can be shot over card games there. Octavio, yeah, it's also where the lamp came from. It's right across from the Bucket of Blood. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Dina. Let me go grab Miles really quick. Don't want to end up forgetting Miles for a tour. Miles! There's the guy. Hey, Pamela. Welcome back. Kathy, I know some other Madison stuff going further west. It didn't come up this particular tour. Connie, there is still a theater in the Opera House building today.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian.
But there's also a lot of offices. Layla worked for a company that had an office in there till just lately. Priya has taken off someplace, I don't know where. Miles now wants all the attention. Like, well, that's only fair, Miles. I got you up. Thanks, Augustin. Sue, there are links for the calendar over on adamchicago.com. Coyotes and Cemeteries. I've only posted a little bit about it. I feel like it'll probably sell better closer to the end of the year, when people are starting to look for a 2023 calendar. Hey, Jan, good luck with the 101-year-old. Thanks, Amy. Hey, Sue, stay spooky to you, too.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking.
I don't know what's going on between boomers and millennials over there. Besides skipping the Gen Xers in the middle, as you usually do. I like Gen Z better. So I'm kind of in the middle, but like my class is kind of divided between my old classmates. Some of them are really Gen X, some of them are really millennials, and I like the Gen Z kids best, so. Friend, that's cool. There's some great recordings out there of Duke Ellington playing there at the Civic Opera building. On a bill with like Django Reinhardt or a bill with Sarah Vaughan and Nat King Cole. That was a night. Dark, is there anything interesting about Bachelor's Grove? The most interesting thing about Bachelor's Grove is the way it makes grown adults act like 8-year-olds. I've seen like guys in their 50s having fights over whether it's a vortex or a portal. Like, dude, you're adults. It's a place where teenagers have been getting smashed since the 1950s at least. There's some interesting history there. And definitely people who have had scary experiences there. Though 90% of the stories there open with, so we were super high, and... It's a cool place to go hanging around Bachelor's Grove. I get a little more spooked in the woods around it. Try to wipe up this, I need to clean this a little better. Maybe it's just the glare from there. Yeah. close this window. Look at that bug me. See if that's made the difference I thought it would. Yeah, pretty much.
On the Alamo.
Well, to a large extent, any article, anti-millennial article or anti-Gen Z article, you could about copy and paste back to the 1960s articles about the generation gap. This kind of stuff's been going on forever. Back to the 1930s when guys would shout, "Hey, beaver," at anybody who still had their Victorian facial hair. Nice Carolina in Poland. Michael, I missed what the adventure is. We'll definitely need some provisions, I'm sure. For those of you just joining us, this is the post-show hangout. We ran at 10 o'clock Central. Nah, I definitely gotta clean this thing. Later. Well, arguments over who counts as which generation are a whole other thing. Basically, millennial is 1982 through, I don't remember 9/11. If you don't remember 9/11, you're Gen Z. Miles is working coyote paperwork. Nah, that's all handled by Lulu. If I had to mail stuff out, you guys would never get it. I'm terrible at mailing stuff. Terrible. Facebook user 98, yeah, you're Gen Z. Miles. I also heard the DuckTales generation for people my age. That works. Darkstalker on YouTube, yes. Supposedly, according to the Hangman, Thomas Neal Cream's last words were, "I was Jack the." This cannot really be taken seriously given that Dr. Cream was in jail in Joliet during the Ripper murders, but he still comes up as a suspect now and then. People have some wild, well, maybe he was replaced by a double type stuff. Really, the Hangman was a big talker around the bar. All right, Kristen, class of 99. Arlie, the Challenger explosion is the first real news story I remember. I find that's very common with people about my age. I was at a parade for the Iranian hostages. I don't remember it, but I'm told I was there. We rode in the way back of the hose and rewound the Atari and... acid washed our pencil sharpeners.
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
I remember E.T. cereal. Aldi put out a version of chocolate peanut butter Cheerios, the Aldi version, not the real one, but it tasted just like E.T. cereal. Okay, Ava, your kid born in 1980 is would often listed as Zennial. Millennial is 82 and after, those who turned 18 around the time of the millennium. So the 82 and 85 are definitely in the millennial category. 80 depends on who you ask. There's a lot of different breakdowns there. Geriatric millennial, elder millennial, Zennial, late Gen X, and frankly, people from my graduating class, some of them are culturally more millennial and some are more Gen X, but I'm Gen Z. Us Gen Zers, you know, always on our phones, constantly. We've got our pop sockets. Yeah, Octavio, I often say when my Target red card doesn't work and I have to blow on it, it's just like a Nintendo game. Arlie, yes. Ecto Cooler. You were referring to Ecto Cooler. How strange that I have some of it right next to me here. Sheer number of things I can pull out of this desk drawer when they come up. Nice Facebook user. Rebecca, that chair back there swivels. It rocks a little bit, it wobbles. Yeah, Arlie, they brought back Ecto Cooler a few years back, briefly.
And here's a short encore portion of Benny Goodman's forthright invitation at the
That could be about the right name for my generation, the Ecto Cooler generation. Some have also said Generation Catalano. That comes up sometimes. Don't I literally have an old gnarled tooth in that desk? Well, let's see. I believe I do. Ooh, ooh. Yeah. For a second, I couldn't find it. That's kind of disturbing when you think you're going to find the tooth and then you don't find the tooth. But nah, here it is. This is one of my wisdom teeth that came out gnarled and twisted. Very painful. I made them let me keep it. It's like, you who were once so proud. All right, Benny is wrapping up, and Kathy says that I'm freezing, so probably freezing right on the tooth, right? All right, everybody, so I got to give Ronnie a ride downtown to some godforsaken land, so thank you, everybody. Sorry, that's, who wrote that? Kurt Stevens wrote Wise Blood. All right, so thanks, everybody. And of course, he was just copying Flannery O'Connor with that line. So anyway, I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours. Quick plug for the upcoming stuff. Next in-person tour is next weekend at Graceland Cemetery. But don't forget, on September 1st, Thursday night, I will be drinking heavily before doing a virtual ghost tour, so we'll see how that one goes. So everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours, here with the ecto cooler that probably caused the wisdom teeth to come out so twisted and gnarled like that. Thanks for joining me. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours, saying to stay safe, stay strong, keep drinking ecto cooler, and it'll help you stay spooky, everybody.